Episode 1, we named the spectrum, all 21 categories of disability that are already present in your school. Episode 2, we held up the mirror, physical barriers, mindset barriers, curriculum barriers, assessment barriers. The 4 ways most Indian schools are unintentionally leaving students behind. Today, we get practical. No philosophy, no policy, no language that requires a law degree to understand. Just 7 things. 7 concrete, specific, immediately doable things that every school in India can begin. Regardless of budget, regardless of infrastructure, regardless of how big or small your school is, or which city or which town it is in. I want you to have a pen in your hand for this one. Because by the end of this episode, I'm going to ask you to write down 3 things you are going to do when you walk into school on Monday morning. Not someday, not after the next budget meeting, Monday morning. This is the Education Verdict, powered by India Inclusion Foundation, and let us begin. Quick reminder, the School Leader's complete guide on the disability spectrum is available free in the description below. Everything from episodes 1 and 2 is in there. Download it, print it, share it with your team. Now let's move. Before I give you the 7 actions, I want to share one idea that will make all of them easier to understand and easier to implement. It is called Universal Design for Learning. But forget that name for a moment because it sounds more complicated than it is. Here is the simple version. When you design a building with a ramp, you did not just help wheelchair users, you helped the parent with the pram, the delivery person with a trolley, the teacher with a knee injury. The ramp built for one person made the building better for everyone. The same principle applies to a classroom. When you build flexibility into how you teach, how you assess, and how you communicate, you do not just help the student with a disability. You help the student who is having a bad day, the student who is a visual learner, the student who is gifted but has a different pace, the student who just joined from another state and is still finding their footing. Inclusion is not a special program for few children. It is a better design for every child. Hold that thought as we go through the 7 actions. You will see it everywhere. Action 1. Change the seating. The simplest physical change in your school and one of the most powerful. Walk into any Indian classroom and you will almost certainly find the same arrangement. Rows of desks, students seated by roll numbers or height, the board at the front, the teacher at the front, everyone facing forward. Now ask yourself, where does the child with low vision sit? Where does the child with a hearing impairment sit? Where does the child with ADHD sit? Where does the child who needs to leave quietly for a medical reason sit? In most schools, the answer to all of these is wherever they happen to have been assigned. Here is what you can change tomorrow. Make sitting a considered decision rather than a default one. Students with low vision, front row, close to the board. Students with hearing impairment, where they can see the teacher's face clearly and where they are not surrounded by background noise. Students who need to leave discreetly near the door. Students with ADHD away from high traffic areas like windows, doors. This costs nothing. It requires one conversation with every class teacher and it changes a student's daily experience in school immediately. One more thing. Never announce to the class why a student has been moved to a particular seat. Inclusion does not require explanation. It requires dignity. Action number 2. Change the language. The words you use in your school are either building inclusion or dismantling it. Every single day, language is not a small thing. Language tells people where they belong. When a teacher says in front of a class, do not be so slow, or what is wrong with you, or even well meant phrases like, he has special needs, so please be patient with him, they are doing damage. Not because they are bad people, because they have never been given better words. Here are 3 language changes that cost nothing and matter enormously. First, use person first language. A child with dyslexia, not a dyslexic child. A student with autism, not an autistic student. The person comes first. The condition is one part of who they are, not the definition of who they are. Also note, some communities, particularly in the autism community, prefer identity first language as a point of pride. Follow the individual's lead where you can. Second, remove casual ableism from your school's vocabulary. Words like mad, lame, dumb, and crazy. Use this every day. Insults are deeply harmful to students who live with the conditions those words originally described. Address it when you hear it, calmly, every time. Third, speak to the student, not them. When a parent brings a child with a disability to a meeting, look at and speak to the child. When a student with speech difficulty is explaining something, wait for them to finish. Do not redirect to the parent or the teaching assistant. The student is in the room. They are the subject of the conversation. Treat them accordingly. Action number 3. Conduct a walk-around audit. 1 hour, your school, a fresh pair of eyes. That is all this takes. Last week, I asked you 4 audits questions. This week, I want you to actually do the audit. And I want to tell you exactly how. Set aside 1 hour, walk around your school as if you are a student with a locomotor disability. Start at the gate. Can you get in without a step or a barrier? Walk to the nearest classroom. Are there stairs? Is there a ramp? Is the ramp actually usable? The right gradient, not blocked by parked vehicles or stored furniture. Walk to the bathroom. Is there an accessible toilet? Is it actually accessible, or is it being used as a storage room? Walk to the library, the laboratory, the sports area, the canteen, the assembly ground. For each space, ask one question. Could a student in a wheelchair get here independently, use this space, and leave with their dignity intact? Write down everything you find. Not to create a report that sits in a drawer, to create a list of things to fix in order of how quickly and cheaply they can be done. A ramp can be built in a day. A sign in large print can be made in an afternoon. A storage room can be cleared in a morning. The audit is not the destination, it is the map. You cannot navigate to inclusion without knowing where you are starting from. Action number 4. Run one real teacher training session. Not an assembly, not a poster, one proper structured session with every teacher in the room. The most effective way to address mindset barriers is structured conversation. Not a lecture, not a policy memo, a conversation where teachers are invited to share what they have observed in their classrooms, what they have found difficult, what they did not know, and what they want to understand better. Here is a simple structure for a 90-minute session that any school can run without an external trainer. The first 30 minutes, share the 21 categories from episode 1 of this series. Ask teachers to think of one student, past or present, whose behavior or struggles might now make more sense through the lens of disability. You will be surprised how many hands go up. The next 30 minutes, Walk through the 4 barriers from episode 2. Ask teachers to identify which barriers exist in their own classroom. This is not about blame, it is about honest recognition. And the final 30 minutes. Give teachers 3 specific changes they can make in their classroom this week. Seating, language, 1 alternative assessment format for 1 upcoming task. End the session by asking every teacher to write 1 thing they are going to do differently and collect those commitments. Follow up in 4 weeks. This is not the complete answer to teacher training on disability inclusion, but it is the beginning. And the beginning is what matters most right now. Action 5. Build a peer awareness program. Children learn from each other. Use that. One of the most powerful forces in any school is peer culture. What students think about disability, what language they use, how they treat a classmate who is different is shaped far more by what they see and hear from each other than by what any teacher says in a lesson. Here is a version that works. Once a term in each class, give students 30 minutes to learn about 1 disability from the spectrum. Not from a textbook, from a story, a short film, a guest speaker who has that disability, a discussion about what that student's school day actually feels like. The goal is not sympathy. Sympathy creates distance. The goal is understanding. Understanding creates inclusion. Students who understand why their classmates need to sit at the front, why their classmates sometimes need to leave the room, why their classmates gets extra time in an exam, are students who do not resent or mock those accommodations. They are students who become allies. And here is something schools often miss. Peer awareness works both ways. Students with disabilities benefit enormously from being in a school where their peers understand their experience. It reduces isolation, it reduces bullying, and it builds the kind of classroom culture where every student feels they genuinely belong. 1 class, 30 minutes, once a term. That is the starting point. Action number 6. Introduce assessment flexibility for 1 upcoming exam. Not a complete overhaul. 1 exam, 1 change. See what happens. I'm not asking you to redesign your entire assessment system today. I'm asking you to make 1 change in 1 upcoming examination. Pick 1 test, 1 subject, 1 upcoming assessment, and offer one of the following accommodations to any student who needs it. Extra time. The most basic accommodation. A student with dyslexia or processing differences is given 25 to 50% additional time to complete the same paper. A scribe. A student who finds writing physically difficult or extremely slow is permitted to dictate their answers to a scribe who writes on their behalf. The scribe writes exactly what the student says. They do not help, they do not edit, they simply write. A reader. A student with significant reading difficulty is permitted to have the question paper read aloud to them. An alternative format. A student who struggles with extended writing is permitted to answer some questions verbally through diagrams or through a shorter written format that still demonstrates their understanding. Make 1 change. Observe what happens. I'm sure you will find that the student who could never finish the paper on time suddenly demonstrates knowledge you did not know they had. That is not a miracle. That is what fairness looks like. And action number 7. Identify 1 student who needs more than you are currently giving. Not a program, not a policy, 1 child, 1 decision. Everything I have shared in this episode is a system level action. Sitting policies, teacher training, peer programs, assessment flexibility, all of it matters enormously. But I want to end with something smaller and in some ways more important. Think of 1 student in your school right now. A student you have been wondering about. A student whose struggles you have not been able to fully explain. A student who seems capable but keeps falling behind. A student who was flagged by a teacher but never properly followed up on. A student who sits quietly and causes no trouble but whom you somehow sense is not quite all right. Now, using what you have learned across these 3 episodes, ask yourself, is there a disability on that spectrum that might explain what I have been seeing? And then take one action. Speak to the student directly. Speak to their parents. Refer them for a proper assessment. Adjust something in their classroom experience. Tell a teacher to check in with them differently. One student, one decision, one change. That is how inclusion actually happens, not in policy documents, not in board meetings. In the moment when a school leader looks at a child who has been invisible and decides to see them. You are that school leader. You always were. You just needed the language. The Monday morning commitment. I'll repeat, Monday morning commitment. I promised you a pen at the beginning of this episode. I hope you have one. 7 actions. I'm not asking you to do all 7 this week. I'm asking you to do 3. Pick 3 from this list that you can genuinely commit to starting on Monday morning. Write them down. Not in your head, on paper, with your name and the date. Change the sitting for at least one student who needs it. Correct one piece of language that needs correcting in your school. Book a time in the next 2 weeks for your walkaround audit. Schedule a date for your teacher training session. Plan your first peer awareness session for next term. Identify one upcoming exam where you will offer one accommodation. Name one student you are going to look at differently starting Monday. 3 of those 7 written down with a date. That is the commitment. That is all I'm asking. Because I've seen what happens when school leaders make the commitments and keep it. I have seen teachers change the way they run their classrooms after one conversation. I have seen students who had been invisible for years suddenly start to thrive. I've seen schools transform their culture around inclusion, not with a massive budget or a specialist team, but with a series of small, consistent human decisions made by leaders who decided to begin. You decided to begin the moment you clicked on this series. Next week is the final episode of our disability inclusion series, and it is a conversation. I am bringing in a guest, someone who has dedicated their life to this work, someone who will speak directly to school leaders about what genuine transformation looks like and what it takes. But before that, Monday morning. 3 things written down starting now. This is the Education Verdict, powered by India Inclusion Foundation, and I will see you next Friday. Good night.